And I'm joined today by Rob Peche. And Rob, I'm very excited to be chatting to you because you are a financial guru and I am financially very inept. And so I'm hoping that you can educate us today on how to be financially fighting fit. Welcome, Rob.
Thanks, Dylan. It's good to be here. I'm especially glad your internet started working at the last minute there. That was close.
Yeah, last week we were let down by Eskom, and this week I don't know, who knows, internet just stopped by the magic of technology. And yeah, I'm a digital marketer. I don't get IT. I don't know Wi-Fi, so I'm connecting via this thing. So if it lets us down, it's blame Vodacom. So Rob, today, we've got so many things that I really want to pick your brain about, just in terms of like, finances and being really financially astute. But let's first start with you introducing yourself. So tell us a little bit about who you are.
Sure. So evening, everyone. I hope tonight will be useful for you. So my background, I'm a CA by profession, although I've never done auditing, never actually really practiced the accounting side of what I studied because I actually didn't have that much interest in it, to be quite honest. So I grew up in Joburg, which is where Miss P and I met, and she's listening a few meters away, and studied at Wits, did my articles at Nedbank, so different to going the auditing firm route. And then I finished up at Nedbank after 3 years, and then I started to work in corporate finance. So what that means is helping big companies do stuff like mergers and acquisitions. So when one company buys another, or raise money on the stock exchange, or get a private investor in. So I did that for 6 years, which was great because I got to see obviously a lot in the South African business landscape, not just listed companies, but private companies as well. Some stuff in Africa too, which was really cool. So yeah, it was a really good experience, split across Joburg and Cape Town. And now I'm down here. Obviously, I no longer work in investment banking, so I moved on to a strategy role, which is what I'm doing at the moment in a large retailer. And yeah, that's basically my formal background, I suppose. And I've got a lot of interest in the markets and how businesses actually work. So taking a lot of complicated stuff and just simplifying it so that anyone can understand it. I always think it's a bit sad when things are so complicated that no one really gets it. And actually, most of these concepts are not that tricky. Just no one really takes the time to explain them properly. So yeah, that's the quick background about me, I guess.
Yeah, I'm also from Joburg originally. I grew up in the East Rand, and I wouldn't call my schooling the best school in the world. And so that probably, that's where I first started having a problem with numbers, thinking that there must be something wrong with me. I just can't do accounting. Later on in life, having done accounting for my marketing diploma, and then again, when I studied my MBA, I had to obviously face numbers, do statistics, do economics, and all of these things, and accounting. And I realized when I studied my MBA that you can get so bogged down in numbers that you lose the bigger picture. And look, the MBA, the only reason I did it was to prove to my teachers I'm not as stupid as they thought I was. And then it turns out that they didn't remember me anyway, so it was a little bit pointless. But the good thing is that it showed me that there's nothing wrong with me in terms of numbers. I mean, I can work it out, but it has still been a big blockage, I think, for me as an entrepreneur to look at. I'll be honest with you, it isn't my strong suit. So I do tend to just look at the bank account and see if there's money, and look at the accounts and see, am I losing money every month? But so what advice would you give to businesses? You've got this amazing experience, and you've obviously really analyzed businesses in terms of value. So like, you're really good, I imagine, at looking at like the numbers and saying, does this company, what is it worth? And how do you analyze that value? So maybe let's just start by that before we get into like the Q&As and that. Like, what's like is the big value drivers that you look at when you're analyzing a business?
Yeah, so it's an important question for anyone who's an entrepreneur or trying to run a business or create something that is more valuable. And I have done lots of that before. And some of the principles are really consistent, actually. And you see entrepreneurs make a lot of the same sort of mistakes in a company long before they actually try and sell it. And unfortunately, by the time they want to sell it, it's either too late to turn those mistakes around, or it still takes them another 2 or 3 years. and they were hoping to sell this business and sail off into the sunset, and it's actually just not that easy. So some of the things that investors immediately look for, and probably the biggest one, is the difference between self-employment and a business. If you're going to sell a business, it has to be able to exist without you. Otherwise, it's not a business, it's self-employment. And it sounds harsh, but it's true. You can't sell something if it's going to rely on you for the rest of time. And there are listed companies that have that problem. I mean, Elon Musk is a wonderful example. Without him, where would Tesla be? Where would SpaceX be? It's a difficult one. Apple managed to survive Steve Jobs, but think of the size of Apple in that context. Bill Gates has moved on from Microsoft. So you have these people who are these standard bearers for these companies. And if they aren't able to actually move on and do something else, then unfortunately the company can't really be sold. So that's one of the really important things when you are building a business, is to have a proper succession plan and to actually have the processes in place so that not all of the knowledge is sitting in your head. You have to actually develop people through the ranks. And it's probably the trickiest thing for entrepreneurs, is how do you bring people through your business coming in at almost a junior level or even at a senior level, and you have to start to trust them with this baby that you've built, in many cases over 10 or 15 years. And so often it becomes about actually just backing the right horse. And even the big names get it wrong. So Christo Visser, who's one of the most famous business people in this country, he got it horribly wrong with Steinhoff. He backed Marcus Joester, and he wanted Marcus to take over that empire so that at some point Christo could retire. And I mean, most people know the story of Steinhoff. Even on a basic level, it basically imploded. People lost essentially everything. And it's a great example of how even the best people really get it wrong. So succession is important. You need to be able to demonstrate that there's someone else who can take the reins from you. And it all comes down to risk management. That's what investors are looking for. Go ahead, Dan.
No, carry on. Risk management, writing notes.
Yeah, so an example of risk management would be a succession plan. But another great example is you need to have a variety of revenue streams. Otherwise, if you've got one big contract, once again, no one is going to buy into your business if it relies entirely on one deal, one relationship, one contract. That can evaporate. And then there's simply nothing left. So part of creating value in a business is actually having diversified revenue, not just different types of clients, but ideally different types of services, different types of products, different types of geographies if you can. When businesses are valued, they come out with what's known as a valuation multiple. And in simple terms, all that is it just says if you are making, say, 100 Rand in profit and your valuation multiple is 10, then your business is worth 1,000 Rand. Now, obviously, if your valuation multiple is 2 versus a valuation multiple of 20, that creates a very different outcome for you as the person selling the business, even though you've got the same amount of profit. So people are going to pay a higher multiple when there's less risk, the business is more diversified, it's just stronger and more stable. It's like buying a used car. If the car is in better condition, you're going to pay more for that BMW versus the exact same car that's full of scratches and the interior is bad and the warranty is gone. It's the same basic principles. So it's everything you do in a business, you need to think about objectively. If you were buying in, would you believe that this business would survive would survive the loss of a major contract? Are you sitting with a whole lot of staff that you actually don't need, which is now creating potentially a problem for anyone else who comes in? A big part of it as well is having the right people in the right roles. So if you've got really senior people doing really menial jobs, then you're going to overpay them for what they're doing. Likewise, if you have these complicated roles that people should be fulfilling, but you don't have senior enough people or you are underpaying them, you're also creating risk in the system. So there's so many examples of how you can create value in a business. And those are just some of the, I suppose, the quicker and easier ways to think about it when you're growing and when you're setting your strategy.
Yeah, and I think as an entrepreneur and as somebody who studies entrepreneurs, and I've interviewed a lot of entrepreneurs, it's always something that I'm always assessing myself against is I think entrepreneurs, a lot of them don't want the business to succeed without them. They want to be indispensable. They want to be needed. And some of them, I feel, actually self-sabotage their own businesses in order to say, you see, without me there, the whole thing went down. But so let's talk about the current situation that, obviously because that's, the economy is starting to open up a little bit now, but there's been heinous damage done to it, whether that was avoidable or not. But so have all companies in your experience, in your analysis, done badly, or are there some companies out there that are still thriving?
Yeah, so some have done insanely well. They've had the year of their lives, especially globally. But there are examples locally as well that have done well. Most have done pretty badly. That is the reality. The economy has taken a massive nosedive. GDP numbers were released yesterday, and all GDP measures is how much income effectively a country earned over a period of time. So if you pretend that the country is one big company, your GDP would essentially be how much income it earned over that period. It's an oversimplification, but it's not a bad way to think about it. And that number was much lower in the second quarter of this year. And that's simply because all businesses were making less and all consumers were spending less on average. The only sector that did well, that grew in the second quarter, was agriculture, which was up around 15%, despite them actually banning wine exports. So I was quite surprised by that. So it's obviously everything else that's kind of pulling that up. Everything else was down. So on average, things have been extremely tough. A lot of businesses, it was their death knell. It was the end of Edcon, for example, which has been struggling for a long time. So that's Edgar's, Jet. That was always going to be in huge trouble. But lockdown was the end. They had to break it up and sell off Jet, sell off Edgar's separately and move on from there. Overseas, you've seen some companies doing insanely well. Netflix has had the best 6 months they could ever have dreamed of. Their subscriber growth was through the roof, and they couldn't produce any new content because of lockdown. So their costs went down. So their profits over this period were spectacular. Amazon, same story, incredible growth in e-commerce. Shopify, which provides the back end to a whole lot of e-commerce sites. Many will have heard of Shopify in one form or another. So they said, I think it was about 72% there was 72% growth in new stores in the second quarter versus the second quarter last year. So a lot of people had to go online. They had to start e-commerce businesses. And Shopify reported revenue, transactions going through their systems was up about 120%. So the world of online has exploded. Discam also gave an interesting stat where their online sales have gone up about 300%. So there's been some really, really big moves in that space. Interestingly enough, not always good. So UK fashion retailers have really struggled because although sales all went online, their profitability takes a knock because delivering online to your end user is actually really expensive. It's not a guarantee that you will make a profit from online, even if you've got great sales. And there are some South African companies listed on the JSE that have interests in UK fashion businesses that have taken a serious knock as a result. Truworths is one example. Brait, which is an investment holding company on the JSE, is another great example. They've really seen huge pain. The restaurant industry has obviously taken terrible pain. And again, there are listed companies that couldn't even withstand it. Famous Brands had to take a massive knock on its investments in the UK. I mean, Famous Brands owns everything from Debonair's, Mug and Bean. If you walk into a food court anywhere in this country, I promise you're staring at a Famous Brands product. And their business in the UK, they basically had to write down to essentially zero. Gyms have done badly. Virgin Active has been shut. They didn't charge people for a few months. That's also part of a listed company. So there are a lot of examples of businesses that have done really well. Anything in the tech space generally had a pretty good period. And anything that was in the consumer space, non-staple goods, if I can call it that, so not just supermarkets, but everything else, has really had an incredibly tough time. Tourism internationally, Hilton, Marriott hotels, they've started to get decent occupancy rates again. But locally, it's going to be a while because we still aren't allowing international visitors. So we have to hope that the government lifts lockdown long before the tourist season, because we have to have a tourist season this year, or you can literally basically write this economy off. And I think the tourists will come back. So your big hotel companies will do okay. City Lodge, on the other hand, another example of a casualty of all of this, they've had to raise money to stay alive. So City Lodge does a whole lot of, or their focus is on business travel. Cheap, affordable, simple little hotels near the airport or near the CBDs, nothing luxurious. And obviously no one was allowed to travel, so you don't want to be sitting there trying to keep a hotel going when there's no one actually paying to stay there. And worst of all is everyone is now doing everything online anyway. So the days of a whole lot of Cape Townians waking up at 4 a.m. to get on a plane and go to Joburg, which I had to do myself for a good couple of years and hated every minute of, those days I think are gone, and I don't think they're coming back because everyone's realized you can work effectively using exactly what we're doing right now, which is a stream or a Zoom or whatever the case may be. And that leaves the likes of City Lodge in big trouble, because if business travel just completely washes up, where does that leave them? So it's been hit and miss, and a lot of businesses have been changed forever. Others will bounce back as soon as things normalize, like tourism.
Yeah, and I think it was hard for everyone to see this coming. So everybody's been talking about, we should work more from home, and yes, you can run your business from home, and we should do everything via Zoom. But most companies haven't allowed their staff to actually work from home. But now you hear of big companies who are actually closing down their offices and saying to everyone, work from home, which I think is a big shift, and it would never have happened if COVID hadn't come along. So on the one hand, there are some pluses, like for us that don't have to travel. And fortunately for my industry, we've had a huge upsurge in e-commerce websites, and everybody going online. But also we lost all of our tourism clients, so very, very sad for that. And it's going to take a while to recover, I think. But so what would you say the big takeout is for entrepreneurs and small businesses during this? Like what are the things to focus on, and how do you survive this kind of situation?
Look, lockdown it's the first time we've ever seen anything like this in the modern world. So you have to accept, it's called a black swan event, which is basically a risk that is so severe and so unlikely that you essentially can't plan for it. It's just one of those things. They happen. A war, disease, natural disaster. You can't possibly mitigate every single risk in your daily life, because obviously you'll just never do anything. So it is difficult, and no one saw it coming, and no one could have seen it coming. Having said that, the businesses that survived are the businesses that didn't have too much debt, typically. So even at big listed company level, companies that had way too much debt really struggled over this period, because you can just think about it. If you have a bond on your house, you have to pay that every month. Okay, yes, the banks gave you payment holidays this time, but that's not how it works in corporates. They don't get payment holidays. So Edcon, great example, completely buckled under debt. Sasol, very close, but actually managed to get out of it. I mean, Sasol is, to my knowledge, it's the biggest corporate taxpayer in South Africa, and Sasol nearly went.
Wow.
And that's extraordinary. If Sasol can only just survive, then you have to ask yourself how anyone could have been expected to actually get through this. But it's all the same principles of building a business that has value. The risk management that someone will look at when they want to buy your business is exactly the same stuff that'll keep you out of trouble. Don't have too much debt, have good relationships with your banks, have enough spare money, have diversified clients, don't have expensive staff who you are overpaying, or too many staff members. I think there's been a big shift towards variable costs as well. So instead of taking on a new staff member, someone says, well, I actually really only need someone very good for maybe 6 hours a week. Why don't I just find someone very good and pay them for 6 hours? And then if it all dries up, I just say thanks, but no more. And it's that that flexibility and strength that basically, gets you through a crisis like this, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. I think keeping cash, it's like, I think everybody's a few paychecks away from the streets. That's the saying, like if you lose your job, how many months could you go, and then you're living on the streets? And it's the same, for any entrepreneur. And I've nearly killed my business at least 2 or 3 times, run out of money, had too many staff, charged too little, overheads too high, reacted too slowly. And so like when COVID hits, I reacted very, very quickly. I was like, I'm not going to spend weeks or months like trying to think, what should I do? I know what I need to do. And, but yeah, fortunately, I think having cash in the bank is a really, really big thing. And I think it comes down to how much money are you taking out of the business as an entrepreneur to pay yourself, drive the nice car, live the nice lifestyle. But then the hard times come and you're sitting without a business and it goes under. So for me, it's always been like I like to see the money in the bank. I like to see cash in the bank, and that's like my security blanket to know that, I've got at least a couple of 3, 4, 5 months runway. If something goes wrong, I'm covered. So that's always been like my go-to. And I suppose it counts for the big companies as well.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about selling a business, because as an entrepreneur, you've been in mergers and acquisitions and all of that. So we did touch on selling a business, and you spoke about, what people look at in terms of the value of a business. But let's talk about strategies, because exit strategies, because everyone's always putting pressure on entrepreneurs. It's almost like when you're dating someone, then they say, when are you getting married? And when you marry, they say, when are you having a baby? And then they say, when are you having another baby? And then they say, when are you getting divorced? Just kidding. But like when you're an entrepreneur and everybody says, what's your exit strategy? So for the longest time, I was like, oh, who's going to buy my business? How am I going to sell it? Who can I sell this business to? It's like somebody trying to give away a baby to everyone. Like, do you want to buy my business? Do you want to buy my business? And I've just kind of actually changed that thinking quite a bit. And we discussed this on the previous show a little bit, but my thinking now is like, you don't actually have to sell a business necessarily. Maybe you can actually just, go lie on the beach and have good people manage it for you, and that's your retirement plan. So there's different ways of looking at it. You don't always have to just sell, But so what are your ideas around like options in terms of now you own this business, what do you do with it? Do you just carry on working till you're old and fall down? Do you hand it over to good managers? What are your thoughts around that? What have you seen that works out there?
Yeah, so I often see people who've got illusions of grandeur when they want to sell their businesses, and they don't have a realistic view on, firstly, what it's worth. Almost no entrepreneur has a realistic view on what their company is actually worth. And they also have a really unrealistic view of how easy it is to sell. So, there's a few things to touch on there. So in terms of selling a business in South Africa, companies will pay somewhere between, for a really good unlisted company with succession planning, the whole shebang, the best you will get is a multiple of maybe 8. That's about as good as it gets. On the JSE, companies will trade, companies like Pick n Pay and Shoprite that have been around forever and everyone goes to them every single day will trade on multiples of sort of 20 to 30, just to give you an idea. So other JSE companies where there's still a lot of risk inside them because their products aren't a daily necessity, they'll trade somewhere between 15 and 20, some of them as low as 10, sometimes as low as 5 if it's really going badly. The private companies, the best you can really hope for is sort of 8 to 10. I've seen huge African businesses across 20 countries with market-leading positions, the whole works, again, sell for 10 or 11. So the point is, if you're going to sell your small business, realistically, you might get a multiple of 1, 2, maybe 3. So that's great. That money will last you 1, 2, or maybe 3 years. And then what? So exiting too early is a challenge. This obviously doesn't include tech businesses that get unbelievable valuations because they've built this incredible product that, Google desperately wants. We can completely exclude that. I'm talking for normal businesses that get sold. So you've got to be very careful that you don't sell too early and you actually just basically run out of money. So that's the one challenge. Also, you have to think about whether you want to sell entirely or whether you want to just bring on a partner. And you have to be super careful when you're bringing an equity partner on board because, yes, they might bring money, but funnily enough, money is not that hard to get if you have a good business. There's a lot of people in the country who would love to invest in great businesses. The money is there. It's the actual businesses that are generally lacking. And when people find good businesses, they jump on board. So you've got to be careful with what sort of partners you bring on. You've got to make sure that you're not dancing with the devil a little bit. You can get private equity players who come onto your shareholder register and they invest in your company and they promise you the absolute world about how they're going to introduce you to everyone and you're going to grow this thing together and it's all going to be fantastic. And don't worry, you don't need to hire a lawyer to look at these legal documents. It'll all be fine. Promise you can trust us. And 99.9% of people have never read a shareholders agreement or a sale and purchase agreement in their lives. They've got no idea what any of it means. They just sign on the dotted line and away they go. And I've seen that countless times with small businesses, and it irritates me to within an inch of my life because it's literally professionals who know what they're doing in this space, just taking advantage of people who don't and not giving them the time of day to actually say, look, you need to actually get advice on this. You need to think about this. You need to make sure you understand what you're signing up for. So the challenge of selling part of your shares and actually getting someone on board is not a joke. And it definitely requires you to have someone who knows what they're talking about in this arena, look at it for you. I did that recently for an old colleague, or not an old colleague, but someone I knew from a previous life, essentially, who's looking at selling a private business. And again, it's amazing what you pick up. Just the huge mistakes that would have taken place and terrible tax losses that they would have experienced and didn't even know about. And it's all this really technical, frankly, often quite boring stuff. But it's the difference between, lying on the beach in the Bahamas and coming back to work in Table View in the next 5 years. I mean, that's the truth. That's the difference. And the other thing that entrepreneurs don't realize is when you are selling your business, you don't just get to hand over the keys and walk away 9 times out of 10. So people typically use what's called an earn-out structure. So you have to earn out of your business. So you go to someone and say, I promise that over the next 3 years, these are the profits that this company will make. And they don't know any better, and they don't want to take the risk of you lying. So they'll say to you, cool, we'll buy the business. We'll pay you 50% of the value today. And you have to stick around for the next 3 years, run it, hand it over to us. If you hit all your targets, we'll pay you the other 50%, no problem. If you don't, sorry. So you can't just quickly walk away. Unfortunately, 9 times out of 10, it's very rare. You've got to have a truly magnificent business to be able to do that. And these are the practical things that entrepreneurs don't realize until they start to walk this road. And then they actually haven't planned for it, and they don't realize how difficult it's going to be. That's one of my other passions in life, is actually helping entrepreneurs just prepare for that big day. They've done the hard work. They've built something cool, and then they get stuck. And it's a pity, because entrepreneurs are what this country needs, not big corporates.
I like it. Thank you. There's some really good nuggets there. So can I don't want to go on too long, but I do want to just, pick your brain a little bit about VC funding, because I'm kind of a little bit passionate about VC funding. I feel like VCs in South Africa, they give you R1 million, they take 25, 30% of your business. And obviously Silicon Valley, we can't compare, but there you might get $1 million for 1, 2, 3%. Okay, obviously depending, what, how long is a piece of string. But I feel like VCs here in South Africa, they don't care about robbing the original founding member, taking so many shares that they actually end up like hardly owning their own business and losing interest. So do you have any views on VC funding? And I think in most cases, don't take the money, rather take a bank loan. But like, what are your views?
Yeah, so I'd be very careful of VCs always, as a general rule. Some of them are fantastic. Some of them are absolute sharks and will put a deal in place that will hurt you down the line. That is almost the norm. You almost need to go into that conversation expecting that these people are finding ways to hurt you and being pleasantly surprised when they aren't. Unfortunately, it sounds so cynical, but it's because I've seen it time and time and time again in practice. These people are everywhere. They are very, very smiley and flashy in meetings, and then you start to ask them a few tough questions and suddenly the tune changes. So having said that, the right VC can be the difference between your business remaining in self-employment and becoming very large one day. But as you quite rightly point out, they often take seriously large stakes in South Africa. And the reason for that is just because of the growth prospects of the business. Silicon Valley, it's a good example, because if you build something big in America, even if you're just big in one state, you are a huge business. If you are big in America as a whole, you are worth more than probably 90% of the companies in South Africa. So in South Africa, VCs look at it and go, well, what is the true growth potential of this? Yeah. And there are examples of businesses that grow here and go overseas. Luno is one great example, the cryptocurrency exchange. The news literally broke today that Naspers and Rand Merchant Investments has sold out their stakes in Luno to an international investor, and that'll really be a big step for Luno to go global. So it does happen, but unless you're going to really go big, it's difficult, because the VCs are always going to penalize you for being a South African business with South African growth prospects. I tend to agree with you. I think that there are other better ways to get capital. I think people put too much faith in VCs and they promise the world, and they don't ask the right questions. And the questions are as simple as, can I speak to 3 other companies you've invested in? Have an honest conversation with those entrepreneurs. Then you'll hear the real story of how it's actually gone, what they promised versus what they've delivered. If you can't do that, if you can't go and actually due diligence them the way they will do it to you, then you need to be careful. And they also walk around, they've got the money and they think that makes them absolutely invincible. I can tell you there are plenty of family offices, high net worth investors, private individuals in this country who are not shy to back really cool businesses and will do it on far less severe terms than your average VC. So the point is to treat them with suspicion. All they have is money and fancy suits and a long CV, and you're the one with the business. And it's important to remember that.
That's really good advice. And so the last thing I want to ask you about is, having a financial advisor as an entrepreneur. Do you encourage it? How do I go about, I've had mentors and I've had really terrible mentors and I had some really good mentors. So how do I pick a financial advisor or someone to mentor me through these kinds of decisions?
Yeah, so it's difficult. So the problem you've got is there's an entire infrastructure of people who claim to be coaches and they will help you through this. And actually what they will do is they will invoice you at the end of the month and add close to zero value. There are financial advisors who are terrible and there are financial advisors who are fantastic. And I guess it's like anything in life. It's difficult to find these people. And when you do, you need to recognize the value of having them involved in what you're doing. And also realize that if you've got to pay for people who are good. And if someone's coming to you and they're desperate for the business from you and they'll do it for a very cheap amount, then you really need to question what value is this person going to bring. And it's another one of my great frustrations is there's a huge shortage of mentors for small businesses in South Africa. I've mentored a couple before. I don't do it for free. And there's a very specific reason for that. Number one, it's my time. But number two, if you're not paying for the service, you're not engaging with it properly either. Then it's just advice around the braai. We may as well have a beer and just chat around the fire. It's not the same as having a proper mentor who actually sets strategy with you and measures goals and keeps you accountable and brings a wealth of experience and ideally a network to the relationship as well. A great mentor should almost be like a VC without the money. That's ideally what you're looking for. Financial advisors, the right financial advisors are brilliant and can make a massive difference to your life because they're sorting out your personal finances, all the stuff you don't want to think about. Are you saving enough for retirement? Have you got a will in place? All of that kind of stuff. It just sits in your head and creates stress. And if you're not getting it sorted out by someone, you're always going to be thinking about it and it's going to distract you from what you actually should be doing. So I found in my little side gigs that I've dabbled in many times before, and certainly the people that I've spoken to, having the right infrastructure of people around you is probably the most important thing that you can possibly do in any business. It's my view.
That's true. That's very true. So speaking of which, I think you have a prize to give away. Somebody can win an hour coffee date with Rob. And if you're far away, it'll have to be a Zoom call with Rob. So you've got a bit of a going teaser for us. So what is the question that you'd like to ask? And one lucky, whoever answers it correctly first gets an hour with Rob.
Yeah, so it's a tricky one. So we'll see how it goes. But one of the world's biggest tech companies was supposed to be added to what is called the S&P 500 index, which is the stock exchange index in America that measures the biggest, not just the biggest, but a set of 500 companies, the most investable companies. And one of the biggest tech names in the world was meant to be added this week. But to everyone's great surprise, it was not added. And as a result, that is partly why share price crashed pretty badly this week, 25-30% down. So that's the tough question. And if anyone gets that, I'll be quite impressed. And if they don't, I'm sure we can think of something slightly easier.
Okay, so hop onto Facebook or whichever social platform you are on that this is streaming from and pop your answer in there. And then the first person to answer correctly, we will be in touch with you. Rob, you've been amazing. Do you have any closing words for us?
I guess just good luck to everyone who's coming out of lockdown and needing to rebuild businesses and rebuild their financial lives. I think it's there's a right answer. It's been an insanely difficult period for a lot of people, and it's been full of winners and full of losers through no fault of anyone. Your entire income could have just disappeared from under your feet overnight. And I think the important thing is just keep your chin up and it will come back. And even if your specific industry has changed, you're never too late to do something new, especially in this world where you can market yourself so brilliantly on social media and all these platforms. We don't need to be that reliant on big companies anymore. You can actually take your skill set to the world. And I think you'll be surprised at how well you can land on your feet when you have no choice.
Very, very good words of wisdom. Thank you so much. And a big thank you to the team at Raylan, to Colleen, and to Paul and Yolandi and everybody, the talented staff that work so hard to keep our little kids' minds still engaged during lockdown and doing everything virtually. So yeah, please join us again next month at The Hustle is Real. We will be interviewing another amazing entrepreneur or business advisor like Rob, and we hope to see you then. Thanks and have a good evening. Bye.
Thank you. Cheers.